super appreciate your coming, and something weird is happening.
Yeah.
But
Because I started recording.
Gotcha. So super appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about the Green Amendment. And we have all agreed that we are presuming no knowledge. So I'm just going to do the whole sort of spiel and we'll go from there. But I think the thing to know about me is I'm Rossum. I'm the founder of the National Green Amendments for the Generations movement. I wrote 2 editions of a book titled The Green Amendment, all about this subject. But more importantly, I have been and I do serve as the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of a 4-state advocacy organization called the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, which is all focused on fighting the good fight for our beautiful earth, including litigating when necessary. And it's through that 30 years of work that I have experienced how our laws fundamentally fail us. And I've come upon this, what I consider to be a powerful transformational pathway for environmental protection. How I came upon that place of recognition, that's part of the Green Amendment story. That's not part of today's talk. So we won't go into that. But I actually did want to start with a story from the book. The book's filled with lots of stories, and actually a lot of them are from New Mexico. This particular story isn't. But I think it's just really important to start with a story to remember why we're here, why we recognize that we do need a new pathway for environmental protection. So I really want to start by sharing with you Gina's story. So Gina was sick constantly, experiencing frequent gastrointestinal issues and hair loss that left her with permanent bald spots. Gina's daughter had been born with an extra ear. But no one had endured greater suffering, paid a higher price for Mount Air's callously destructive actions and pollution than Gina's son, Kiwanis. Kiwanis had been born with asthma, and his case was particularly severe. When your asthma is at its worst, it's like somebody put a plastic bag over your head and just pulled on a string and cut off all your air circulation, says Gina. He really suffered. He just suffered. When Kiwanis left Millsboro for a year to attend school, his condition seemed to improve significantly, but then he came home, and his asthma was once again a daily source of hardship. Despite nebulizers, inhalers, prescription steroids, and an EpiPen, he struggled to keep it under control. On March 5th, 2014, Gina got a frantic phone call. While hanging out in a house full of friends, Kiwanis had suffered an extremely severe asthma attack. They were calling an ambulance. She needed to drive immediately to the hospital. By the time Gina arrived, Kiwanis had passed away. He was just 24 years old. I checked with his job and he went to work early that night and he stayed until the time to get off, Gina recalls. And he wasn't sick. He didn't tell me he was sick or anything. It was an incomprehensible loss. Just as incomprehensible was the official cause confirmed by an autopsy that took Gina 4 months to get a hold of. It said he died from an acute asthma attack, she says. And I was like, who dies from asthma anymore? Another heart-wrenching reality was that the very same pollution that likely caused Kiwanis's death had also likely affected him from the very beginning of his life. One evening, Gina sent Maria a form and asked her to take a look. It was a form for supplemental security income, a type of Social Security assistance for people with disabilities, which Gina had been receiving for Kiwanis. The SSI form said that he could not be educated because of a lack of oxygen to the brain, Maria recalls. Now, there is no bigger crime against humanity than a child who, because of pollution exposure issues, cannot develop to be the person that they ought to be. The thing is, when people hear stories like that, and there are so many of them, they say, how is it possible? How is it possible that that could happen here in the United States of America? Don't we have a right to clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environments? Isn't that our right by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth? And the truth is, Here in the United States, here in New Mexico, we have all kinds of rights. We have the right to free speech and freedom of religion. We have private property rights. We have a right to bear arms, but we actually do not have environmental rights. We don't have a right to clean water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. Right? What we have instead is we have a system of laws. We have a system of laws that is focused on legalizing environmental pollution, degradation, and harm through reviews and permits. It is not a system that is focused on preventing pollution and degradation from the get-go. It's also a system filled with gaps and loopholes. There are many things that are not regulated at all, or laws that will apply to all kinds of industries, but there'll be a carve out for one that has particularly devastating consequences. It is a system where environmental racism is embraced and is perpetuated as part of that system. And it's a system where children are very literally an afterthought. And unfortunately, a system where industry has much greater access to the levers of power than the rest of us, than we ordinary people who depend upon a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And the result is real harms to real people. And I actually was thinking to read another story, but I'm not going to in the interest of time. But we really have people here in New Mexico and across the nation that are suffering because of pollution and degradation. This is just a representation of one farm and one farmer who literally had his farm and his life devastated because of contamination, water contamination by a man-made family of chemicals known as PFAS. That was allowed to proliferate into the environment, into the water, into people's bodies, and into his cows because of an absence of regulation and protection that prevented this man-made family of chemicals from being manufactured and utilized in ways by industry and by the Department of Defense that would allow it to just get into the environment and have these devastating consequences. The thing is, when it comes to the environment, we do, right? We know, we hear about it all the time. We know in our hearts and our minds that we have a human right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. But the problem is having a human right is not the same thing as having an enforceable right. And I would suggest to you, if the right is not enforceable, do you actually have it? You have it in your heart, you have it in your mind, but you don't actually have it in reality. But that's what a Green Amendment does. That's what a Green Amendment is. A Green Amendment gives the inalienable human right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. It gives it enforceability, constitutional, legal enforceability. It very literally lifts up environmental rights. So they are given the same most powerful protection as the other fundamental rights we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech and freedom of religion, private property rights, the right to bear arms. We all know how powerfully those recognized human, civil, and political rights are protected because they are protected at the highest levels in our Constitution. Well, a Green Amendment gives that highest constitutional standing and protection to environmental rights. Now, if you want to get that highest protection, not just any language anywhere in the Constitution will do. There are specific criteria that I have identified, what I call Green Amendment criteria, which ensure that environmental rights get this highest standing. We know that not just any language will do, because the truth is almost every state, including New Mexico, talks about the environment, even talks about environmental rights within their constitutions already. And that's all the states in purple, but only 3 states, Montana, Pennsylvania, and now New York, actually lift up environmental rights so they get that highest constitutional standing as those other fundamental rights. So what are the key criteria? What do you have to do if you want to have the environment get this highest recognition and protection? Well, first off, the language has to be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That's non-negotiable. That is where we place the other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. It is one of the reasons why they have such powerful legal protection. If we want the environment to have that same most powerful protection, the environment has to be in the same section of the Constitution. We have to be clear that we are protecting the rights of all people. And we have to be clear about what we're protecting. Fundamentals, essentials of life, like clean water, clean air, right? A healthy environment, a stable climate. The language needs to be self-executing, what we call in the law self-executing, meaning that it has legal strength and enforceability in its own right. If your right to clean water is being infringed upon, and you can't find an existing law to do anything about it, you could actually turn directly to the Constitution to vindicate that right, right? The Constitution, in its own, because of its own language and placement, has legal power, strength, and enforceability. It has to apply to all government officials at all levels of government, from the local town council to the state legislature, to the governor's office, to all the regulatory agencies. Every layer of government has something to say about the environment and environmental protection, right? And at every level of government, there are key decisions that happen. And so we want to make sure the environment is thought about in every decision that's made. So if there are tweaks or changes that need to be made, right, they can be made all along. We're not waiting to the end of the process when we say, oh my gosh, now we have a catastrophe, how do we fix it? We've actually fixed it along the journey, or said no early on before there was a significant investment of time, resources in whatever the project is. The language needs to really explicitly recognize the rights of future generations. And this is not just pretty language, right? We want to make sure that future generations are actually constitutionally and legally entitled to the same kinds of protections as we alive here today are. If we have this kind of criteria, and there are some additional elements, I didn't want to go into everything, but if we have these kinds of criteria, we truly can bring transformational change to environmental protection. We strengthen the law and we empower people and we empower their advocacy. How do we do that? Well, first off, again, environmental rights are now on par with those other fundamental rights. Just think about it. If there is an infringement on the right to bear arms, right? If somebody comes up and claims, says government action is infringing on my right to bear arms, what happens? What happens? The whole community rallies around the person who claims their right has been infringed upon. The press come together and they report on the story and lift it up. Politicians all try to figure out, what can we do? What can we do to restore the right or to address this problem? The judges and the justices listen seriously and carefully to any legal claims to make sure that they are making the right to determination to ensure that that right to bear arms is protected. Everybody comes around and does their piece to ensure the right to bear arms is protected and, if infringed upon, restored. That same kind of power now comes to bear for the environment. Government constitutionally must refocus itself on prevention of pollution, degradation, and harm first. They can't hop to the end of the process and say, how are we going to legalize it through permits and reviews? They have to think, how can we prevent it first? That becomes a constitutional obligation. Environmental justice is incredibly strengthened because now all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their tribal membership status, their socioeconomics, we all have the same constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And government becomes constitutionally obligated to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably. If we have an environmental sacrifice zone where we can demonstrate that communities of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities are being disproportionately impacted by pollution and degradation, we can now start to turn to the Constitution to try to get a remedy. There truly is generational justice. Future generations must be protected as powerfully as the generations here today. And this is not just aspirational. This is not just a pretty ideal that we hope to strive for. This is actually legally enforceable. We've demonstrated that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we have in the Constitution an obligation on all government officials to protect natural resources for present and future generations. And when the courts have had to consider that question about generational protection, they have been very, very clear that future generations and their entitlement to a clean, safe, and healthy environment must be factored into the decision-making to ensure it is protected. It doesn't, the right of future generations doesn't mean that we all today get to gobble up all the natural resources the way we want. And then way down the line, decades down the line, right, then the law comes to bear and protects sort of what's left over for future generations. No, we have to make sure that the future generations get the kind of environmental entitlements that we have today in the way government acts. It's really meaningful. Climate justice is a reality because we do have to protect the rights of future generations. In New Mexico's language, we are being very clear. There is a right to a stable climate. So the decisions that get made around energy, environment, greenhouse gas emissions, climate changing emissions, right? All of these now have to be interpreted through the lens of climate justice, the right of the people and including future generations to a stable climate. With a Green Amendment in the New Mexico Constitution, the laws that we already have in the state get strengthened. They don't go away. They're not thrown into disarray. Now, the obligations, the environmental protection obligations in those existing laws have to be interpreted through the lens of constitutional environmental rights. How must regulators and legislators and lawmakers and enforcement entities interpret and apply those existing laws so they get utilized in service to protecting the constitutional entitlement of all the people? It becomes a powerful foundation for new protections and new laws for good government officials who want to do better. And it does help fill the gaps. If you have a gap in law, again, if you have an absence of law to address something like PFAS contamination, people can now turn to the Constitution to advocate for, seek, and secure government action that will fill the gap and make the difference. If there is a problem, and good advocacy and good government doesn't make a difference, then people do get access to the courts, and the courts can come and become part of the process, as they are in all aspects of environmental protection and all aspects of constitutional law. They can now come in and lend their expertise to help determine whether or not there's been a constitutional violation and whether or not government officials need to do something more or different to remedy the problem. But it is not just about the law. It really is about strengthening environmental activists and environmental activism. Right now, when people get up to advocate for the environment, very often, right, you know, they're viewed as tree huggers and fish lovers. Sometimes they're viewed as job killers or people haters, right? But now when environmental advocates get to step up to advocate for the environment, they are not just fighting for the earth and the people that they love. They are fighting for a constitutional right, a constitutional entitlement that belongs to them. It changes the language they use. It changes this sense of entitlement and empowerment. So people advocate much more firmly for the environmental protections that they are seeking, but also all the decision makers have to listen to them more seriously, because we are now talking about the Constitution. And it's not just about what people believe about environmental protection. It now is this constitutional obligation on government officials. So they have to take more seriously what activists are saying and respond much more appropriately. They can no longer just disregard the way too often we see happen when we're advocating for the earth. The Green Amendment movement is a nationwide movement. It's about getting a constitutional environmental rights amendment, what I call a green amendment, that fulfill these key criteria in every single state across the nation, and then ultimately at the federal level. We need green amendments at the state level and at the federal level because both layers of government have tremendous power. But we know we're not going to get a federal green amendment right now today. And that doesn't just have to do with the politics of the day. It's because people haven't heard about this concept. They haven't thought about this concept, right? Not at least until I started the Green Amendment movement a number of years ago, where people now, it is starting to come into the common parlance. But we have a lot of work to do to make people understand what this Green Amendment is, why it's needed, why it's so powerful, so that when there's a federal proposal, we can get it passed. But what better way, as we're sort of doing this journey of making people aware, of going first at the state level, where environmental or constitutional amendments are done much more, they're much more accessible, they're done much more quickly, much more easily. Let's go state by state by state, educating people, getting near-term constitutional green amendments and getting this meaningful protection. And at the same time, we will be sort of creating the foundation necessary for a federal green amendment, because we do need them both. So it's just strategically better to start part of the states. And New Mexico really is a leader. The New Mexico Green Amendment hasn't been in play for about 3 years now, and we've been making a lot of progress. We have really powerful language here in the state of New Mexico, and people are coming together in order to advance this powerful protection. But there's a lot more work to do because the government officials are using their levers of power to disempower the people when it comes to this process. So we really need people to become aware of this and to get actively engaged in supporting it. At this point, just so you know, nationally, there are green amendments in 3 states. New York, we actually just secured passage in November 2021. So they've had it for about a year now, and we've had it in Pennsylvania and Montana for a number of years. We have proposals in nearly a dozen other states, and again, half a dozen states or so where people are organizing around it. We're about to get a proposal in Nevada and in Texas. We have a proposal in Iowa. Hawaii's proposal passed through 3 committees this past week. Here in New Mexico, we have yet to get a hearing. And we're, what, 3 weeks into session? So, but anyway, things are happening around the nation, and New Mexico is part of it. Now, I guess I'm not really going to go into this in too much depth. People do say, does it really make a difference? And I just want to tell you, it really does, right? We have been able to use the Green Amendment to defeat devastatingly pro-industry, pro-fracking laws in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The amendment has been used to challenge permits that would have allowed industrial gold mining operations in remote natural areas that would have had serious consequences for the environment, as well as for ecotourism and local economies. And because of a constitutional infirmity in the permits were identified, those permits were declared unconstitutional. In the fracking context, those portions of the law that were going to really have devastating consequences, those portions of the law were excised out as being unconstitutional. The rest of the law went into play, but these really devastating parts didn't. We start to see local governments relying on their Green Amendment obligations and opportunities to protect the environment, rejecting development projects and other projects that would have had devastating consequences for natural ecosystems. This is a quickly urbanizing town outside of Philadelphia. And this piece of green space, it's actually an old growth beech forest that was about to be destroyed by a development project. Relying on the Green Amendment, after 3 years of advocacy from their constituents, the local government said, you know what, we say no to this project because we want to protect that old growth forest. And that forest is now being protected as natural open space. We've had government officials rely on the Green Amendment to help strengthen their decisions to better protect drinking water supplies, either by preventing contamination or in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for putting in place drinking water protections from PFAS contamination. And the Green Amendment has also been used to address long ignored problems, like also in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a massively supersaturated toxic site that the government knew about for 30 years. And rather than enforce existing laws to clean it up, it was negotiating a sweetheart deal with the developer that would allow this toxic site to be developed with over 200 residential homes without any cleanup plan in place. Using the Green Amendment in advocacy as well as litigation and then more advocacy, that sweetheart deal was defeated, and now the government is refocused on cleanup of this long ignored site. So how do we make this happen in New Mexico? We literally make this happen because of people. The question was asked to me before the start, like, what's the process here in the state of New Mexico? The way we can get a constitutional amendment is by having the legislators approve proposed amendment language, having both houses pass the language by majority vote, and then it goes to the people. The governor has no say. Majority vote of each legislative house, and then it goes to the people. It's incredibly accessible, but we need the hearings and we need the votes from the legislators in order to be able to get to that step. So we have a website, www.nmgreenamendment.org. There's lots of resources. There's lots of calls to action. If you sign up on things, you inevitably will end up in my site, and I will email you directly when there are action items to be done. We also have a new app that is dedicated. There's a whole community dedicated to New Mexico. So there's a new Green Amendment app. People can get on the app and be very engaged in getting action alerts and hot news exactly when it happens. But you can also make your own postings, ask your own questions, share your own insights. If you have a letter to the editor, you can post it on the app. And the New Mexico Green Amendment community is all New Mexico Green Amendment all the time. It actually looks, when you get on, it sort of operates very similarly to like Facebook or Twitter, but it's only New Mexico Green Amendment conversation. You don't have the infiltration of all these other confusing conversations. We have a very powerful and growing group of organizations that once again are rallying around behind the New Mexico Green Amendment. Here it's HJR 4, SJR 6, in case you didn't know. And here's what the language says. It says, in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, it will read that the people of the state shall be entitled to clean and healthy air, water, soil, and environments, a stable climate, and self-sustaining ecosystems for the benefit of public health, safety, and general welfare. The state shall protect these rights equitably for all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, tribal membership status, socioeconomics, gender, or geography. The state, counties, and municipalities shall serve as trustee of the natural resources of New Mexico and shall conserve, protect, and maintain these resources for the benefit of all the people, including present and future generations. The provisions of this section are self-executing. Monetary damages shall not be awarded for violation of this section because it was never about money payouts. It was about protecting constitutional rights. And the section is enforceable against state, counties, and municipalities. It also would amend the Constitution in order to repeal existing Article 20, Section 21, which is really focused on pollution control and controlling despoilment of the environment, and gives essentially all the power to the legislature. And as long as the legislature legislates, even if they do so badly in ways that sacrifice the environment and environmental rights, the Constitution has been complied with, but the people are no better off. And so with that, I'm going to read one more little bit from the book, which I think is a nice conclusion. I do want people to know the book is new out, and there's a whole lot about New Mexico in here because I have really appreciated working with the communities of New Mexico, and I truly find you inspiring. So I'm just going to read one short little bit because I think this sums up for me very much really what I think about it. Of course it does. I wrote the book. So that was kind of a silly thing to say. No matter where you happen to live, I'm here to say that you should dramatically raise your expectations when it comes to the environment. You have a right to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. This right is inherent and indefeasible. It belongs to you. Many politicians rail against entitlements and dismiss millennials as an entitled generation, but they've got it wrong. Entitlement is not a dirty word. It is a recognition of rights. And make no mistake about it, when it comes to the environment, you are entitled. So that is my message. The book's very accessible if anybody wants it, and every penny goes to the Green Amendment movement. No money to Maya's pocket, because that's not what it's about. And so with that, if there are any questions about what's happening or about how the amendment works, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes?
So what happens in New Mexico with regard to Pueblo and tribal lands? There's been a history of corporations basically buying off tribal governments to do things on tribal lands that they might not be able to do elsewhere. How does this affect that?
So the Green Amendment, like other state constitutional provisions, respects Native American sovereignty. This does not seek to overreach and impact their sovereignty or undermine their sovereignty in any way. The New Mexico state constitution applies to state government action. So whenever the state government is acting in a way that could infringe on the environmental rights of the people or denies their constitutional obligation to protect natural resources for present and future generations, that's when the Constitution comes into play to either guide their activity or, if necessary, to challenge it. So in terms of tribal lands and tribal people, if there is a state government action that is going to happen that would infringe on their environmental rights too here in New Mexico, then Native American people could rely on the Constitution for protection, but it would not impact, again, the sovereignty or the leadership or the decision-making of the tribes.
So it would not prevent corporations from going onto tribal lands and doing things they couldn't do in the rest of the state.
I don't know what you have in your mind, but it's not about stripping from the tribes their sovereign authority. Whatever it is we think about it, it's really important that we respect that, and this does respect that. So.
The legislature is in session right now. Where is the Green Amendment in the legislature? What's happening now?
Yeah, so there was a positive early development, and then all is quiet, and that's the problem. So last year, the Green Amendment on the Senate side was assigned to 3 committees. The previous year it had been 2 committees, and then last year it was assigned to 3 committees, which was really, everybody recognized pretty much the death knell from the get-go, because there wouldn't be time in a 30-day session to get it through 3 committees. This year, very early on, it got assigned to just 2 committees on the Senate side, Senate Rules and Senate Judiciary. On the House side, because we have parallel provisions, it's been assigned to the House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee, as well as the House Judiciary Committee. The problem is, that's what's happened, assignment to these committees, but we do not have hearings that have been scheduled. And if you can't have a hearing, you can't have a committee vote. And if you can't have a committee vote, it can't pass out of committee and continue down the process. So we really have 2 things that need to be done. And if you go on either the app or you go on the website, you have a way to get the most recent calls to action, which include what we're calling is mobilization Mondays. So every Monday, we are identifying a series of leaders in government that need to be contacted by the people, and you need to demand that they sponsor, support, vote for, schedule for hearings, the Green Amendment, right? We need the hearings so that people can be heard, and we need all government officials who claim to care about the environment and claim to care about the health and safety of their people, who claim to care about good economic development here in the state of New Mexico, to commit to vote in support of the New Mexico Green Amendment. And then on Thursdays, we call it something, I forget what. On Thursdays, we're going to have weekly sessions where we will update people on where the Green Amendment stands. Answer any questions about what's happening procedurally or how it works substantively. And then for those who are not as experienced in activism or advocacy, we're going to have like an additional training session to take people in depth on how to effectively use social media or other things. So there's sort of 2 parts. People can come get up to date and get their questions answered and just do that, or they can just come for the second part, which is the trainings, or they can come for both. This week, the focus is on House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources, and urging all committee members to commit to vote yes to the Green Amendment, and also to get a hearing for it.
Okay. And the chair is Matt Day.
Correct.
The online information.
Pardon?
Okay.
Yeah. So NM Green Amendment, let me go back. nmgreenamendment.org. You'll also find out how to get the app on there, right? Like a website is more static, put information up, whereas the app is more of a dynamic conversation and much more timely, because as soon as I get hot news, it goes up. Yeah.
In your opinion, what is the most effective way to contact these legislators when there's something?
So I think the reason why on Mobilization Mondays we're encouraging phone calls or emails is because if you can get to Santa Fe, if you can get to the Roundhouse, there's nothing like having a personal conversation They're really, but you know, that's hard, right, for people. So a phone call and an email are really powerful ways to get in touch with them. If you want to hold them publicly accountable, then adding to that a social media post, a tweet. And we also have Twitter handles on our action items, because that sends them a message in a way that's very public. And legislators do tend to follow what's happening on social media. And so if you share your thoughts about them on social media, and holding either gratitude or disappointment, that's meaningful. But I would suggest that phone call or that email directly are really important. And then the social media is sort of the additional add-on. And we do have also on our action alerts what we call click to tweets. So if you literally click on the legislator's name, if they have a Twitter account, it will immediately open up your Twitter and suggest a message that you could post to them, and you can modify it any way you want. But it's a really easy way to quickly be able to do a social media post if that's not like your thing. And for some of us, right, like social media is our thing, and for some of us it isn't, because we just don't have time for it all. Yes, sir.
What about regular media, the newspapers?
Yes, letters to the editor, regular media, powerful and important. A letter to the editor, talking about what's going on is important. If you know how to contact your local newspaper and submit a letter to the editor, awesome. If you don't, we also have on the website a platform where you can go and you can type in your letter to the editor, and it will actually submit it to the papers that are in your geographic proximity. So, but yes, thank you for asking that question. Letters to the editor are powerful and important, and great if you could do them. And if you happen to have a media contact, you know somebody, a reporter, radio, news, whatever, call them up, send them an email and say, I'm a New Mexican and I want to see this happen. You interested in talking to me? Because I think reporters should be talking to real people about what they think about this. There has been a campaign by, not surprisingly, the fossil fuel industry, but disappointingly also by lobbyists who claim to be representing big, they call them, big clean energy. It's really big wind projects and transmission lines, somehow trying to assert that the Green Amendment would be harmful to the advancement of truly clean green energy here in the state of New Mexico. It's 100% the opposite. Because of this constitutional obligation to protect the climate and to protect natural resources for present and future generations, because addressing the climate crisis is a demonstrable, compelling state interest, right? The Green Amendment will actually encourage and support good decisions that advance clean and renewable energy projects as compared to, right? And as opposed to dirty fossil fuel projects. So it's unfortunate the lobbying firm representing the big companies that claim to be that are represented, I don't want to say claim, that are represented by them. Their memo is a 100% misrepresentation of the law, of the Constitution, what has happened in other states. They actually in a meeting freely admitted that their parade of horribles, their made up hypotheticals in this 10-page memo have never happened anywhere in an existing Green Amendment state. But yet somehow it's going to happen in New Mexico. And they also suggest that judges in New Mexico and getting the judicial system involved in environmental laws and environmental protection, this is a problem, as though judges aren't involved in, again, every aspect of the law with regards to the Constitution, existing environmental laws. New Mexico judges are just as smart as judges in Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York, where they have very effectively interpreted and applied green amendments in those states. So it's a little bit insulting, I would say, not even absurd, insulting to suggest that the New Mexico judicial system does not have the same kind of wisdom in the environmental context that they do in other constitutional contexts, or that exists in other green amendment states. But nonetheless, that's what this memo does. We do, for people who want to know more, we have our response to their memo is up on the website. I do not have their memo on the website because I do not believe giving my platform to the opposition. right? I'm not going to perpetuate their false information by putting it out to the world. They can do that. But you can see our response, which is an accurate characterization of how things work. Anything else?
Is it true you drove all the way here from Pennsylvania in an electric car?
I did drive all the way here in Pennsylvania, from Pennsylvania in an electric car, and in Pennsylvania, a number of years ago, my husband and I we got loans, right? It's not like we have money in our pocket, but our house is an all electric house. We have geothermal on the grounds. We have solar panels on our roof. We have our all electric car. And yes, I drove my all electric car here rather than fly in a plane. And I was, because of my mother and a gift from my mother left to me, it's also in the book, I have a little place, it's mainly a forest in New York that we preserve for preserving nature's sake. And there's this little hovel of a house. And that house is an all electric house, which is off grid with solar panels on the roof. So yes, I do believe in practicing what I preach.
Are there really charging stations all the way?
Yes, I went all the way from Pennsylvania to New Mexico in my electric car. And yes, I charged the whole way. I didn't get stuck anywhere. I have a very, I have experience with a number of different kinds of electric cars. I have the electric car I have because of my experience with accessibility on charging stations in the current situation that is changing. But anybody who wants to talk about electric cars and how they can get you where you need to go, I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm not happy to give an advertisement to somebody who's gone off the rails politically. How's that? But that's part of that is part of the reality. But in terms of actual cars, I actually liked my Chevy Bolt much better, but the charging stations, just that system is not yet up and running. And so they're, in my experience, your options, if you need to be able to travel long distances, there really is just one option. In my experience. And that's changing.
Bad. I mean, we're a big state.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
I can't even get to Carlsbad in an electric car.
So it's about, yeah,
That's a problem.
yeah. But I could later, I could type in Carlsbad into my car and tell you how I would get there. But again, it depends on what system you're on.
And how much time?
Yeah, well, actually, the charging, I mean, my charging, I find stopping to charge is not very often. Like, so this is how I would do it. I would stop, I would go to the bathroom, I would get a cup of coffee, I would eat the salad that I had in my car, and I was gone. And very often when I'm in my day-to-day life, in my work as a Delaware Riverkeeper, very often I will stop because I need to stop anyway to go to the bathroom, right? I'm going, a meeting that's 2 or 3 hours away. I go in, again, I go to the bathroom, I get my coffee, which I would have done anyway. By the time I get out to my car, I'm fully charged up and I can keep going. I do not find it to be a burden, but yes, you do have to plan in a little bit of extra time.
How did we get off on that?
Because I guess the question was, can you actually do electric car and travel long distances? Yes, you can. So, any other questions on the Green Amendment? No. I did, of course, many of the people are on Zoom. I did bring some materials. We have door hangers. If people want to help spread the word, just take 10, take 20, and share them, with your neighbors by handing them, or if you're, concerned about exposure to neighbors, hand them on the door. We have information cards that can be handed out. Anyway, and I brought some, but most of it's accessible. People can sign up to distribute it on, and we'll send it to you. So anyway, thank you.
Thank investment in Mexico, I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. I really love being here in New Mexico, but the thing, like I tell people, it's like I I don't just love my husband. I really like him and I really like my kids. I really like to be with them. So it is really hard to be here for 7 weeks because I do miss them.
Yeah, that's a long time.
So,
How long are you here?
I'm here for 7 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been here for 2.
Are you staying in Santa Fe primarily?
I am, so that I can at the moment's notice, if I need to be an expert for someone, hop over and be there.
Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for helping to spread the word. I appreciate it.
Your neighbors?